One quiet afternoon, Daniel stepped into the small attic, a space frozen in time and filled with his family's old belongings covered in layers of dust. A soft stream of sunlight trickled through the cracked window, casting a gentle glow over the boxes and keepsakes that hadn't been touched in years. Daniel was helping his mother sort through the attic, but deep down, he knew this wasn't just about cleaning. It was a journey back into the past, a glimpse into memories of his father, Samuel, a warm, talented man taken too soon. As Daniel opened a wooden box tucked away in the corner, his eyes fell upon something unexpected: an old, worn cassette tape and a small, battered notebook. His heart skipped a beat. He reached for the cassette, noticing the faint handwriting on the label that read, "For my son." The simple message stirred something deep within him, like a hidden door to his father's world suddenly cracked open. Holding the cassette in his hand, Daniel felt an intense connection, as if his father were there in the stillness of the attic, watching over him. He turned to the notebook next, flipping it open with care. The pages were yellowed, filled with small creases, as though it had been opened and closed many times. It was clear this notebook had held a special place for his father. Each line of his father's careful handwriting revealed thoughts on music, notes about melodies, and reflections on life. On the first page, Daniel read a line that struck him deeply. "Music is the language of the heart. It's how we speak to those we love." He could almost see his father sitting there, meticulously writing each note and phrase, pouring his soul into this small book. As Daniel turned more pages, he found numerous notes about an unfinished song. It seemed Samuel had started writing a melody, yet had left it incomplete, a song that had never filled their home. A mix of curiosity and confusion washed over him. Why had his father left this song unfinished? And why had he never shared it? In that moment, a new determination welled up within Daniel. He knew he couldn't ignore the notebook or the tape that his father had poured his heart into. Holding both in his hands, he felt as though he was on the edge of a new journey, a journey to uncover the music his father left behind, and in doing so, to keep a part of his father alive in a way he never imagined. That evening, in the quiet of his room, Daniel sat on his bed, clutching the cassette tape he had found. The feeling of connection and anticipation from the attic had only grown stronger, filling him with a strange mixture of excitement and sadness. After a deep breath, he picked up an old cassette player he'd found in the attic, placed the tape inside, and pressed play. A faint, familiar crackle filled the silence before his father's voice broke through, raw and warm. "Hey, Daniel." The voice sounded slightly hesitant, as if Samuel had been carefully choosing each word. "If you're listening to this, I guess you're older now. Maybe you've started to understand music. Maybe not yet. Either way, there's something I've been wanting to share with you." Daniel sat frozen, his breath catching as his father's voice brought back memories that he'd thought were long gone. Samuel's tone was gentle, affectionate, and carried the warmth of every conversation they had ever shared. "There's a song I started a while back, a melody that never quite found its ending. I started it thinking of you. I'd hoped to finish it, but life doesn't always go as planned," Samuel continued, his voice faltering slightly. "Music, son, it's more than just notes and chords. It's a way of keeping pieces of us alive. And this melody, it's a piece of me, of everything I wanted you to know, even if I couldn't say it." As Daniel listened, the quiet notes of a guitar began to play through the speaker. The song was delicate, haunting, yet somehow comforting. Each chord, each pause seemed to carry an unspoken emotion, a message of love, dreams, and the things Samuel had left unsaid. For Daniel, it was as if his father were there beside him, pouring his heart out through this unfinished melody. Samuel's voice returned, softer now. "If you ever feel ready, I'd love for you to finish this song. Make it yours, bring it to life, and just know, I'll be listening." The tape clicked softly, signaling the end, but Daniel sat motionless, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. He realized this was more than just an old song or an abandoned project. It was a legacy, a piece of his father's heart entrusted to him. The quiet room suddenly felt filled with Samuel's presence, as if he were still there, watching over him, guiding him forward. Determined, Daniel held the cassette player close, the melody lingering in his mind. A part of him now understood. that he wasn't just listening to his father's music. He was being given a chance to finish something deeply meaningful, something that could keep Samuel's spirit alive through his own voice. The next day, Daniel walked up the creaky steps of an old building, his heart pounding as he clutched the notebook and cassette tape in his hands. He was on his way to meet Mr. Robert, his father's former music teacher and close friend, hoping that he might offer some insight into Samuel's unfinished song. Mr. Robert's apartment was filled with an eclectic mix of vintage instruments and musical memorabilia, posters from concerts, stacks of records, and worn-out guitars leaning against walls. It felt as though every inch of the place had its own story. Daniel took in the surroundings with reverence, imagining his father spending time here as a young man. Mr. Robert, a man in his 60s with gentle eyes and a slightly stooped posture, welcomed Daniel with a warm but surprised smile. "You look just like him, you know," he said, studying Daniel's face as if seeing Samuel's younger self reflected there. He gestured for Daniel to sit, his gaze softening. "So what brings you here, Daniel?" Taking a deep breath, Daniel explained everything: the attic discovery, the notebook, and the tape recording where his father's voice spoke directly to him. As he shared, Mr. Robert listened intently, his expression shifting between fondness and sadness, like he was traveling back to memories he hadn't revisited in years. When Daniel finished, Mr. Robert nodded slowly. "Your father, Samuel had such a gift, you know. Music was everything to him, more than just a hobby. He had a way of pouring his heart into every note. But when he became a father, he made a choice. He wanted to be there for you and your mother, more than anything." Mr. Robert carefully took the notebook from Daniel's hands and flipped through the pages, his eyes lingering over the musical notes and lyrics scrawled across them. He smiled softly. "This song, I remember the first time he played it for me. He was working on it, pouring his soul into it. He'd hoped one day you would understand it. It was his way of talking to you about everything he couldn't quite put into words." Daniel leaned forward, hand mouth, absorbing each word as if it were another piece of the puzzle his father had left behind. "Do you think you could help me finish it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Robert's face softened, a hint of pride glimmering in his eyes. "Of course, I'd be honored," he said. "But Daniel, you don't need to play it exactly as he would have. Your father wanted you to make it yours. Music is as much about finding your own voice as it is about honoring the voices that came before." Together, they spent the rest of the afternoon going over the song. Mr. Robert patiently walked Daniel through the intricate chord progressions Samuel had created, explaining the emotional intent behind each verse and pause. The process wasn't easy, but with every note, Daniel felt himself drawing closer to his father, understanding him on a level he hadn't before. As the sun began to set, Mr. Robert looked at Daniel with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "Your father left you more than a song," he said quietly. "He left you a way to find yourself." Daniel nodded, his heart both heavy and hopeful. The journey he was beginning was no longer just about completing a melody. It was about discovering the part of himself that had been waiting, buried in the music his father had left behind. Over the following days, Daniel and Mr. Robert embarked on a journey across the city, visiting places Samuel had performed and shared his music many years ago. Each location was steeped in memories of a different time: an old cafe with weathered furniture, a small music hall with peeling posters, and even a cramped basement club still smelling faintly of spilled drinks and vintage leather seats. These places held pieces of Samuel's story, a history Daniel was only beginning to understand. At the first stop, Mr. Robert led Daniel into a small, dimly lit cafe. "This is where your father played his first solo," he said with a wistful smile. Daniel looked around, imagining his father as a young man, guitar in hand, standing in the corner by a makeshift stage. Mr. Robert pulled out an old recording from a dusty box the cafe owner had kept, and together, they listened to Samuel's voice fill the room. The sound was raw, but there was an unmistakable energy in his playing, a spark that seemed to resonate deeply with Daniel. They continued on to a second venue, a slightly larger but still intimate music hall. This was where Samuel had performed with a small band, Mr. Robert explained, sharing how Samuel had always been the heart of the group, someone who lifted others up, even as he wrestled with his own ambitions and sacrifices. Here, the hall's owner brought out an old reel-to-reel tape recording, and as they played it, Daniel heard the laughter and applause of an audience moved by his father's music. Each location brought with it another layer to Samuel's story, and with every note Daniel heard, he felt the spirit of his father more vividly. But it wasn't until they reached the basement club that Daniel encountered something profoundly personal. In the back room, among stacks of unused sound equipment, he found a recording labeled Heart's Melody, the title his father had jotted in the notebook. As they played it, Daniel was stunned by the sound of a solo performance of the unfinished song. The melody was beautiful, hauntingly so, but it faded out abruptly, as if Samuel had been interrupted, leaving the song unresolved. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the melody sink into him. It felt like a conversation, a message from his father he was only beginning to grasp. After the song ended, Daniel sat in silence, processing everything he had learned. Mr. Robert watched him, giving him space, knowing the significance of these moments. Finally, Daniel looked up, his eyes reflecting both sadness and a newfound resolve. All these places, they were part of him, weren't they? His dreams, his struggles, they're here in every note, every performance. Mr. Robert nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. Yes, they are. And now they're a part of you too. Your father left these pieces behind, hoping one day you'd pick them up. The journey back home was quiet, both men deep in thought. Daniel felt as if he were carrying a new weight, not of sorrow but of purpose. His father's song, his legacy, was calling him to finish what Samuel had started. Daniel knew that to honor it fully, he'd have to infuse it with his own spirit, his own voice. The task was daunting, but he felt ready, if only a little, to face it. As they walked into the evening light, Daniel made a silent promise. Whatever it took, he would complete his father's song, not just for Samuel, but for himself, to keep alive the melody of a love that transcended time and loss. In the days that followed, Daniel poured himself into the song, working with Mr. Robert to learn the complex chords and delicate melodies his father had crafted. But despite the progress, an invisible weight grew heavier on him. Every time he touched the strings, he felt a looming expectation, not from Mr. Robert, but from himself. He wanted to do his father's memory justice, to play the song perfectly. The more he tried, however, the further away he seemed to drift from capturing the song's essence. Late one night, after hours of struggling to perfect a section, Daniel let out a frustrated sigh, setting his guitar down harder than he intended. He stared at the instrument, a surge of self-doubt rising within him. "What am I doing?" he whispered into the empty room. The quiet walls offered no answers, only the reminder of his father's absence. He was left with the haunting realization that no matter how hard he tried, he might never be able to replicate the emotion his father had poured into this music. Mr. Robert sensed Daniel's struggle the next day when they met to practice. Daniel's playing was tense, each note forced rather than felt, and his eyes held a quiet frustration. Finally, Mr. Robert placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "Daniel, let's take a break." Sighing, Daniel looked down, ashamed of his struggles. I don't know if I can do this, Mr. Robert. I thought I could finish the song, but I'm not even close. It's like the harder I try, the further away I get." Mr. Robert gave him an understanding nod. "Daniel, your father didn't expect perfection from you. He wanted you to find your own way through the music, not to copy his." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Music isn't about getting every note right. It's about expression, letting yourself feel and connect with what you're playing. Your father wasn't a flawless musician. He was a passionate one." Daniel's gaze softened as Mr. Robert continued. "You're carrying a heavy burden, trying to honor his memory. But sometimes you have to let go of the weight of expectations. Play the song as you, Daniel. Let it be a piece of your story too." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Daniel felt a small sense of relief. He realized that the song didn't have to be exactly as his father had imagined. It just needed to be honest, a blend of both their voices. That evening, alone in his room, Daniel picked up the guitar with a renewed spirit. This time, he played without worrying about every note, allowing himself to feel the music and the connection it held to his father. As the melody filled the room, he sensed a shift. not in the song, but within himself. He was no longer simply recreating his father's vision. He was beginning to add his own. By the end of the night, Daniel felt something he hadn't since he started: hope. He understood now that this wasn't just his father's song, it was theirs. And he was ready to continue, even if the journey was far from perfect. The next evening, Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the worn notebook his father had left behind. Each page carried Samuel's handwriting, marked with notes, lyrics, and small personal reflections that offered glimpses into his father's creative process. But something new caught Daniel's eye: small, repeated symbols scattered throughout the pages that he hadn't noticed before. Intrigued, he leaned in, flipping through the notebook page by page, realizing these symbols seemed to correspond to certain lines of music, certain phrases, and even some emotional cues his father had written. Daniel picked up a pencil and began marking each symbol, each small star or circle Samuel had drawn. The symbols seemed to create a hidden structure within the song, almost like a roadmap. With a sense of growing anticipation, Daniel noticed that some phrases were underlined, with cryptic notes like, "Think of home," or "For him, not me." It was as though his father had woven messages into the music, leaving behind his thoughts and feelings in a language only Daniel could understand by piecing them together. As he continued to decode each section, Daniel began to see the song in a new light. It wasn't just a melody or a collection of notes, it was a conversation. The notes revealed Samuel's journey, his passion for music, his dreams, his sacrifices, and above all, his love for his son. Each symbol felt like a piece of his father's soul, like Samuel was guiding him even now, showing him how to pour his own emotions into the unfinished melody. Suddenly, the line, "For him, not me," took on a powerful meaning. Daniel realized that his father hadn't written the song for himself. It was always meant to be a legacy, something he could pass down. Samuel hadn't wanted the song to be perfect. He had wanted it to be real, alive, a vessel of shared experience between father and son. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude, as if his father were right there beside him, offering silent encouragement. Over the next few hours, Daniel worked through each symbol, each phrase, letting the song take on new life. He added his own notes and phrases, altering some parts to reflect his own experiences, and merging them with his father's. The music became a fusion of two lives, two voices, Samuel's and Daniel's, each note a testament to the love they shared. By the end of the night, Daniel had made the song his own. It was still Samuel's melody, but now it carried Daniel's heart too. The hidden messages and symbols had shown him the way, revealing that his father's greatest wish wasn't for him to finish the song perfectly, but to fill it with meaning, to let it become a part of him. As Daniel closed the notebook, he felt a profound sense of connection, as if he had finally unlocked his father's legacy. With the melody now complete in his mind, he felt ready to take the next step, to share this part of both of them with the world. Over the following days, Daniel immersed himself in his father's song, working tirelessly to bring it to life with the passion and emotion he had discovered through Samuel's notes. He practiced each chord, letting the music flow naturally, not worrying so much about perfection, but instead focusing on the feeling within each note. The song had transformed from an elusive melody into something deeply personal, a collaboration between him and his father, built on memories, hopes, and love. One afternoon, Daniel met with Mr. Robert in the familiar, cozy music room where they had been practicing together. Holding his father's notebook close, Daniel felt a new confidence and purpose. Mr. Robert, sensing this shift, gave him a proud smile. "You seem different, Daniel, lighter somehow." Daniel nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "I think I understand what he wanted me to do, Mr. Robert. He didn't want me to recreate his music. He wanted me to make it mine. I found some notes in his book, these hidden messages. It's almost like he left me instructions, but in a way that would make me feel it, not just read it." Mr. Robert's eyes softened, his respect for both Daniel and Samuel evident in his expression. "Your father was always one for hidden messages," he said with a gentle laugh. "But you found the heart of it, Daniel. Music isn't just sound, it's feeling, connection. That's what he wanted for you more than anything." With a renewed focus, Daniel took his seat, guitar in hand, ready to run through the song from beginning to end. Mr. Robert sat close by, occasionally guiding him through challenging sections, but mostly listening, allowing Daniel to explore and interpret the music on his own. As Daniel played, the notes began to flow seamlessly, each one infused with a mix of Samuel's soul and Daniel's own. The melodies he had struggled with before now felt instinctive, almost as if he were speaking through the guitar, telling his father's story and his own. Mr. Robert looked on, his eyes bright with pride, as Daniel continued to pour himself into the music. When the last note faded, Daniel looked up, breathless but filled with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt before. Mr. Robert, clearly moved, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Daniel. That was more than just playing. That was sharing a piece of yourself." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of those words sink in. He had finished the song, not just as his father had left it, but as a part of himself. The song was now a bridge between them, a legacy he was ready to carry forward, shaped by both of their voices. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Robert looked at Daniel with a mix of nostalgia and hope. "You're ready for the next step," he said gently. "Your father would be proud to see what you've done. Are you prepared to share it with others?" Daniel took a deep breath, the image of his father's proud, kind face filling his mind. "Yes," he said, his voice steady, "I'm ready." With his father's guitar in hand and the melody resonating within him, Daniel left that day with a new purpose. He was no longer just honoring Samuel's memory. He was embracing his own musical path, carrying forward the song they had created together. The night of the performance arrived, filling Daniel with a mixture of excitement and nerves as he approached the small venue where his father had played so many years ago. The old stage was tucked away in a cozy corner of the city, and though it had aged over the years, the charm remained. Worn posters, dim lights, and a slightly scuffed floor all told stories of musicians who had come and gone, including Samuel. This night, however, it was Daniel's turn to take the stage, carrying with him the weight and honor of his father's legacy. Friends and family gathered in the small room, some faces familiar, others strangers who had known Samuel through his music. Daniel spotted his mother in the crowd, her eyes already brimming with pride and emotion, and Mr. Robert, who offered him an encouraging nod. The rest of the audience waited in quiet anticipation, sensing that something special was about to unfold. Daniel took a deep breath as he stepped onto the stage, his father's guitar slung over his shoulder. The warm glow of the stage lights washed over him, and for a brief moment, he could almost feel Samuel's presence beside him, as if his father's spirit lingered in every corner of the venue. With a steadying breath, he stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice a little shaky but filled with sincerity. "This song, it's more than just music to me. It's a piece of my father's heart, a part of him that he wanted to share. And now, I'd like to share it with you, in the way he left it for me, unfinished, but filled with everything he wanted me to feel." The room grew silent as Daniel positioned his fingers on the guitar strings and strummed the first chord. The melody flowed softly, filling the air with a haunting, beautiful resonance. It was Samuel's song, yet it was Daniel's interpretation, a collaboration between a father and son, woven together by love and the legacy of music. As Daniel played, he felt himself lost in the moment, letting each note speak the words he couldn't express. The music wasn't just about honoring his father anymore. It was about letting his own heart shine through. He could feel the emotions swell within him, his father's memory guiding his fingers across the fretboard. Each note a conversation that bridged the past and present. The audience watched in captivated silence, some visibly moved by the rawness and depth of Daniel's performance. Each strum of the guitar seemed to hold the echoes of Samuel's life and dreams. And with every verse, the bond between father and son grew stronger, reaching out to everyone present. As he neared the final chords, Daniel looked out at the audience, and his eyes caught a faint, almost imperceptible silhouette in the corner, a figure that seemed to watch him with pride and warmth. It was as if Samuel himself were there, smiling at his son, standing in quiet approval. Daniel's heart swelled, and he closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the presence fully. The song ended with a soft, lingering chord, and the room erupted into applause. Daniel opened his eyes, his chest heaving with emotion as he looked around at the faces in the audience, their applause a testament to the legacy his father had left behind. As he stepped off the stage, his mother embraced him tightly, her tears flowing freely. Mr. Robert joined them, his own eyes glistening. "You did it, Daniel," he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. "You brought him back for a moment through your own voice." Daniel nodded, feeling a profound peace settle over him. He had completed the song, but more than that, he had honored his father's spirit in a way he hadn't thought possible. The song was no longer just a tribute. It was a beginning, a promise to carry forward the music and the love that Samuel had given him. As the applause faded and the crowd settled into a gentle hush, Daniel took a moment to breathe, still feeling the weight of the performance. But the profound sense of connection he'd felt on stage hadn't disappeared. It lingered, filling him with a warm, almost surreal presence. Standing there, guitar in hand, Daniel closed his eyes, as if to hold on to the final notes of the song. And then, like an echo across time, he heard it, a soft, familiar voice. "You did well, son." The words were faint, but unmistakable. His heart pounded as he opened his eyes, looking out over the dimly lit room, half expecting to see his father in the crowd. But Samuel was nowhere to be seen. Daniel's pulse quickened, a feeling of wonder and disbelief coursing through him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew deep down that his father was there somehow, watching him, reaching out to him in the only way he could. Overwhelmed, Daniel's vision blurred, his father's voice replaying in his mind. It was more than just a memory. It was a presence, a feeling as tangible as the strings under his fingers. Every note of the song seemed to carry Samuel's encouragement, every silence an assurance that he was not alone. "Daniel, you okay?" Mr. Roberts' gentle voice brought him back to the present, grounding him as he placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Daniel nodded, his gaze still fixed on the empty spot in the audience where he'd felt his father's presence. I think I heard him," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "It was like he was here, Mr. Robert, watching, listening." Mr. Robert looked at him, understanding softening his expression. "I believe he was, Daniel. Sometimes when you pour your heart into something, those we've lost come back to remind us they're never truly gone." He paused, his own voice thick with emotion. "Tonight, you played with everything you had, and that's all your father ever wanted." With those words, the weight of the journey Daniel had taken washed over him. The long hours of practice, the memories he had uncovered, the moments of doubt and determination. And now, standing there, he felt a completeness he hadn't thought possible. The song had been more than a tribute. It had become a bridge between them, a way for him to feel his father's presence even in his absence. Turning back to the stage one last time, Daniel quietly whispered, "Thank you, Dad." He felt a warmth settle over him, like a final, unseen embrace, as if his father were gently letting him know that he could move forward now, with both their spirits intertwined. In that quiet, timeless moment, Daniel realized that his father's music would forever be part of him, a melody that would guide him as he stepped into the future. The following morning, Daniel awoke with a profound sense of calm, a quiet certainty that the night before had given him a gift he would carry for the rest of his life. His father's song still echoed in his mind, each note intertwined with memories, emotions, and the legacy Samuel had entrusted to him. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel the weight of loss as he thought of his father. Instead, he felt a warm sense of companionship. He spent the day reflecting, allowing himself to savor the journey he had taken. The uncertainty he'd felt when he first discovered the tape and notebook had transformed into clarity. He knew now that this path wasn't just about honoring his father's memory. It was about creating something of his own, continuing a legacy that was both Samuel's and his. That evening, as the sun set, Daniel made his way back to the park where his father had once played, carrying Samuel's guitar slung over his shoulder. The world seemed bathed in a golden glow, as if nature itself were acknowledging the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Standing there, with the guitar in his hands, Daniel felt his father's presence beside him, as real as the breeze that rustled the leaves. With quiet determination, he strummed the chords of Heart's Melody, the song that had once been incomplete but now felt whole. This time, though, he played it with a new rhythm, his own interpretation, a blend of Samuel's heart and his own spirit. As the last note lingered in the air, Daniel looked out toward the horizon, his heart swelling with both pride and purpose. He knew this was just the beginning. Music, once his father's dream, had become his own. He had found his voice, not in copying his father's, but in embracing his father's lessons and allowing them to guide him on his unique path. Closing his eyes, Daniel whispered, "Thank you, Dad," a final note of gratitude for the gift Samuel had left him. With each step forward, he felt the gentle rhythm of his father's legacy steadying him, and he knew that as long as he carried that song in his heart, Samuel would always be with him. With one last look back, Daniel left the park, guitar in hand, ready to share their music with the world.